In today's photo deconstruction, I want to show you how I use two specialty modifiers and two different gels to create an eye-catching and graphic beauty image. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here. And as you know from my work, I love creating images that are bold and clean and graphic and focus on beauty. And in my fashion-intensive workshops, I show a variety of different techniques. I show people how to create images that are sellable for commercial beauty photography. I show how to do commercial catalog images. And I also show fashion editorial images, which is what you see here. This is one of the images from one of my most recent fashion-intensive workshops. And by the way, in these workshops, we do a lot of hands-on. We talk about everything from commercial to business to creative. And so if you want to learn more about those workshops, visit learnwithlindsay.com and go to the workshop section. Now, on to this image. One of the things that photographers really limit themselves with is that they're afraid of hard light. But hard light gives you so much control and so much drama, and it creates really poppy images. But photographers are generally afraid of hard light because of what they think it does to the skin. So in this photo deconstruction, I want to show you how I use two different specialty modifiers, both of them hard light, to create a graphic image. But I also want to show you that it can create gorgeous lighting on the face, even though it's very hard light. So with that being said, let's actually pop over to the behind the scenes. Now, the concept for this shoot was I wanted to play around with complementary colors. I wanted to play around with a blue and an orange. And so I decided that I wanted to create almost a sunset look behind the subject's head, almost like a halo, so that it would be warm, and then contrast it with the blue in the foreground. Now, this is an editorial image, meaning I'm not necessarily trying to sell anything, but I'm trying to create an eye-catching image that's perhaps part of a series that tells a story. The look here is beautiful. It's covered in bling, and so I wanted to figure out what I could do to make this pop. All right, so let's actually begin with our main light. Now, our main light on the left-hand side of the frame is called a Fresnel. A Fresnel is just like the light that you see in a lighthouse. It's got that textured, shaped modifier. It's got that lens. What it does is it creates a focused, hard light. But the way that that light is shaped, the way that it moves, it's a hard light with really defined edges, but somehow it's still quite smooth on the skin. It's not overly specular. It's gorgeous. And so if you've never tried a Fresnel before, this is the one in this behind the scenes that's made by Photo, but it can be quite pricey. I do love that one. You may want to check out the Nanlite Fresnel, which I have a link in the description below, because this is a much more affordable option that will give you a similar quality of light, this hard but still smooth. And one of the reasons that this is such a nice modifier is that it has a couple different options. You can flood the light to light the subject, more broadly, or you can spot the light and create just a tiny spotlight of this hard light on the face. And so here I'm mostly lighting just her shoulders, her chest, and her face, which you can actually see in the behind the scenes where you see the white light illuminating her face and her shoulders. So we began with that hard light. And then I wanted to introduce the background light. So specialty modifier number one was the Fresnel. Specialty modifier number two is what we have on the background, which is an optical spot. This is the Westcott optical spot, which by the way, I designed with Westcott. And here I'm using the kit lens. This lens is great when you want really crisp, concentrated light, often for head and shoulders, tight beauty shots, or in this case, to create a perfectly crisp circle on the background, which is what we've done here. Now, this is where I started to play with color theory. I wanted this to look like a sunset, so I've added an orange gel. By the way, not just CTO. CTO stands for color temperature orange, but this is a richer orange, so it's more of a party gel, a super saturated one. So I have that on the background behind her. And the lens, you can soft focus it if you want more of a gradient on the edges of that shape, or you can focus it so it is razor sharp, which is what we did in this example. By the way, optical spots have something called gobos. You can put shapes into the modifier so that you can project it on the background. But by default, the optical spot creates a circle, so there isn't any sort of gobo here. This is just what the lens creates, and it's focused. And you can see that behind the subject. All right, so we've got Fresnel on the face, hard light. Optical spot on the background, another specialty modifier with an orange gel, super sharp to create that circle. But I wanted to play with complementary colors, and so the last element that I introduced to the scene here is the beauty dish. I am using a beauty dish with a grid, and in that I have a cyan gel, like a cyan blue gel, so I could play around with those complementary colors. Now, one of the things you should know about gels is that they show up most in shadow areas. And if this is a brand new concept to you, you should check out my class, The Magic of Gels. I have a video tutorial, a lighting recipe guide. You can buy them together or separately. And in this, I explain how to achieve saturated colors, how to place the colors where you want them to, how to work with color theory, all of those different elements. So I love gels, and I highly recommend that class, especially if you're interested in this aesthetic. So what I've done here is I've added that blue gel in the front with the Beauty Dish with the grid, and it'll mostly show up in shadow areas, which you can kind of see, the shadow of her dress or lower in the frame. That's where we're picking up the most saturated color. Now, before I move on and show you what the shot's looking like, let's talk a little bit about the background. The background here I'm using is a thunder gray. It's a darker gray background. The reason I did this is I didn't want any of the fill light to show up on the background. A white or a lighter gray would likely have picked up some of that blue. I wanted to really restrict it just to the fill light. So a slightly darker background makes this easier. It's not as reflective. But I don't recommend black. Black would be too hard to get the optical spot to actually show up because it absorbs so much light. By the way, let's talk about my camera settings. And so here I'm using the Canon 24-70 2.8 paired with the R5. The Canon R5 is a gorgeous mirrorless camera with this lens, which is super, super sharp. Now you'll notice here that I'm shooting at a wider aperture. I'm shooting at f2.8. It's not because I'm trying to put the background out of focus in particular, but the wider aperture guarantees that with the optical spot, I don't have to shoot with my strobe at really, really high power. One of the things you'll discover is when you're using an optical spot or a similar modifier that concentrates the light, if you're shooting your strobe at full power, 10 out of 10, the way that it concentrates light also concentrates heat. And so if you're shooting that high, sometimes it will overpower and overheat the light. So being able to shoot at a slightly lower power is actually a benefit. And one of the ways to do this is a wider aperture or a higher ISO or both of those things. All right, so let's take a look at what I captured in camera. So this is the shot in camera, and there's a couple of things I want you to notice. So first of all, I've got a nice crisp circle on the background, again, achieving that without any sort of gobo. I want you to see the color theory, the orange and the blue, and how that complements each other beautifully. I also want you to notice all of those beautiful highlights all over the subject, those stars. This is created by a Tiffin 4-point star filter. Now, a star filter works great anytime there's a hard light that creates a specular highlight. And so since she is wearing rhinestones and we're using a Fresnel, which is a hard light, it is a perfect opportunity to introduce the star filter. And that's why you see all of these highlights all over the place. But whenever you add a star filter, it decreases the contrast in the shot. That's just kind of how it works. And so I do know that I'll likely have to add a little contrast after the fact. But as I am zoomed in here, I am using a very hard light on my subject, the Fresnel. But notice how it's smooth. And the skin still looks beautiful. And yes, my subject does have nice skin. And yes, the makeup is good, but I want you to notice that hard light doesn't mean it has to be aggressive and show a ton of contrast on the face and show all the blemishes. It's a combination of many of these things, but again, the Fresnel is hard, but it's still smooth. Plus, we have a little bit of a fill light. So even without retouching, this is looking clean. It's looking beautiful. Now, as I back up here, a couple of things I notice. I think that I have a little bit too much negative space maybe on the top right and the top and the right hand side of the frame. I see a little bit of a distraction here in the bottom right. I think I need to add a little contrast. And you know what? I think I want to take this out of the realm of real and probably play around with the color grading to make it a little surreal. Like make it look maybe a little old-timey, maybe like a poster advertising a theater production, something like that. Like this is my concept. That is to say that how you post-process something comes down to your intent, to your purpose. There's no right or wrong answer. It's what are you trying to achieve? And that's why your post-processing can drastically affect your style. Somebody might process something to be more painterly and low contrast. Another person might go high contrast and super saturated. And that is all part of your vision. So this is what I captured straight out of camera. But this is what I was playing around with as I was playing with Capture One and my raw processing. I cropped in, I increased the contrast, I desaturated the skin tone and brightened it up a bit. So you can see that it becomes a lot more clean and a lot more crisp. And this would be totally fine. As I mentioned, she doesn't need that much retouching, but I do want to show you what I did in Photoshop. I ended up straightening things out even more, and I went for this kind of washed out porcelain look on the skin. I made everything look a little yellow and cyan. And so it looks maybe a little bit more filmic. And maybe you like this one better. Maybe you like the original clean, more of the normal colors. It really depends on what you were trying to achieve. So this is the direction I ended up going. And I love that that circle behind her becomes almost like a halo. It becomes angelic, a little bit more like religious iconography. But everything is clean and perfect, including the retouch on the skin. I wasn't going for natural. I was going for something that is really graphic and like an illustration, which exactly fits into my style. So as you can see here, I've used two specialty modifiers, a Fresnel and an Optical Spot, each one achieving a different special effect, and both of them with hard light. So if you'd like to see the gear that I use to make these images, be sure to check out the links in the description below. And of course, I recommend that you visit adorama.com. And if you want to capture images like these in person, come to one of my workshops. I post many intensive workshops each year, and there are a variety of different topics. It's burlesque, fine art nude, fashion intensive, creative lighting, advanced lighting, and much more. So you'll definitely want to visit learnwithlindsay.com and check out my next year's intensive workshops. And I hope you've enjoyed this photo deconstruction. I have many more of these coming your way, so be sure to like and subscribe. See you next time, guys.